Yesterday, I was gandering at a Bring a Trailer auction for a 19,000 mile 1991 Ferrari Testarossa. Just sort of looking at it because, it's one of my favorite cars of all time. And just kind of wanted to see how much it sold for. I can't afford to bid on it. And then my friend texts me about something not car related. But I still make the mistake of opening Instagram to go to my messages. And the first thing I see on Instagram is a car and driver post about the new Ferrari 849 Testarossa. And my jaw hits the floor. How dare they call it the Testarossa if it looks like that? The front end is just wrong. It has like puffed out cheeks. I don't know how to describe that. They try to make it a more square front end by adding these bumps on the fenders. Just genuinely speaking, it looks ugly. The back end is also not reminiscent of the Testarossa. To me, it is very generic modern Ferrari. And then the biggest crime of all. And don't get me wrong, unlike the front end of this car, the side profile actually looks pretty decent, but how dare you call it a Testarossa without the cheese grater intakes? Where are they? Where did they go? Why is it just one big gulpy intake up there? If I'm not mistaken, intake actually swoops down into the door, which is somewhat reminiscent of the current Ferrari F1 car. So that's actually a really cool detail, but again, Testarossa. It just seems Ferrari intended on making a special edition car with the sole purpose of re-invoking the Testarossa name so they don't lose the trademark. Except it's not a special edition. Welcome to the first episode of the new CGS News. And you're about to hear me complain about a car that I can't afford. The post-Pininfarina, post-exclusivity era of Ferrari has had fans very conflicted. Of course, when moving your brand into a new generation and to aim for a younger crowd, you do have to break some rules, you do have to break some traditions, and generally speaking, your old fan base is not going to always be happy about this. Now, a controversial time such as this puts Ferrari's modern lineup on a spectrum of meh, where their more respected cars, such as the modern 296 or even the special edition Daytona SP3, of course do have its detractors, and there are valid criticisms of both cars, generally speaking are much higher in the meh, they're pretty good. Then you move maybe a step further down the ladder, where you get cars such as the Roma and the Dolce Cilindro, where there's a lot more complaints to be heard. There's a lot more detractors of these cars, and this is where you'll find a lot more people specifically saying that Ferrari's not what it used to be, and that modern Ferrari is a disaster. But generally speaking, these cars are still being sold and are still getting pretty positive reviews from critics. Then moving a step further down the ladder of meh, we reach cars that are pretty controversial, but still have some positive attributes and positive reviews, such as the F80 and Puro Sangue. These cars, to a lot of people, are the much better examples of what's wrong with modern Ferrari, with actual substance to back it up. I won't get into details on these cars because they could be very much videos within themselves, but I'm sure if you spent any amount of time on car internet, you have heard a lot of the complaints. Which takes us to our final stop on the meh spectrum, where it's not all bad, but to a lot of people, the SF90 is the real problem with modern Ferrari. But this is where I really want to launch this video from, because the 849 Testarossa, by the way, number just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it, is actually the successor to the SF90, which stopped being produced last year. Now, I've already said design-wise some of the differences and problems with the Testarossa and how it is not related to the old one, but it's not even lineage technically the same car either. When speaking Ferrari lineage and which car went directly into the next car, things start to get pretty complicated pretty fast, especially in the different eras of Ferrari where they rearrange their lineup like a Lego set and just keep building a different menu each time every 10 years or so. But the original Testarossa never really had a successor, technically speaking, because not counting special edition cars such as the Daytona SP3 and other examples I might be forgetting, it was the last rear-engine V12 Ferrari ever made. But that being said, after this, Ferrari returned to having a higher end and a lower end front-engined V12 GT, which means that the Ferrari 550 Maranello could be technically called the successor to the Testarossa. It's probably the closest, and then if you follow that lineage all the way down, you get to the Dolce Cilindro. So that's not exactly accurate. Now, the point of that rambling history lesson that a lot of you probably tuned out for is that the Testarossa not only design-wise doesn't line up with the original, it also doesn't line up in the lineage of Ferrari. Now granted, Ferrari throws their names around very loosely for some pretty good examples. The recent Daytona, other than having a V12, just doesn't line up in the lineage with the original Daytona, which was never called the Daytona, yes, I'm aware. I keep referring to the 1984 Testarossa as the original, but many true Ferrari fans will know that that is not strictly speaking true, because of course there's also the 1958 250 Testarossa, which especially doesn't go in this lineup because that is like a prototype race car that was meant for racing. And they had pontoons, sometimes. I think it's time we finally get into the part people actually care about, which is comparing the 1984 Testarossa versus the new Testarossa, but also versus the SF90, the car it's trying to replace, to get a picture of how we think this car is going to be received on a more analytical sense. So, the original Testarossa, adjusted for inflation, started somewhere between $434,000 and $573,000. It's a big range because I only got one number for the original price, and I don't know whether that refers to the beginning of production or the end. Sources cited below. Now the SF90 does still go above that by about 20 grand, starting at $593,950. And while nothing has been made official yet, Motor Trend estimates that the 498 Testarossa will actually also drop the price a little bit, being somewhere in the $540,000 range to $587,000 range, which I kind of doubt, but I'm going to assume that Motor Trend knows better than me. Blame them if it starts at 70. And while the drop of the price could definitely help the sales a little bit, it's still a massive mystery exactly how well the 849 Testarossa is going to be sold. I haven't announced any production numbers yet, which would give us an idea of how well they're going to sell. But one thing that we can compare is the original Testarossa versus the SF90. So the original Testarossa, from its run from 1984 to 1991, had 7,177 units, as well as the two following updates, which lasted the car till 1996. The 512TR had 2,280 units, and the F512M had about 501 units, leading to a total of just under 10,000 cars for the original Testarossa in a 12-year run. Now, the SF90 had about half the time to work with, 2019 to 2024, so you have to cut it a bit of slack. And also, you have to remember that, adjusted for inflation, is about 20 grand more for the base price on the high end, but it could have been a lot lower. So with that being said, you do have to assume that the SF90 probably have sold less units total. You know, I would guess maybe like 35 to 4 seems reasonable. So 1,398 units doesn't seem great. Granted, for a high-end, low-volume production car, that's still like a decent number, but it's enough to mention why when you Google was the Ferrari SF90 a failure into Google, you get a more complicated answer than a straight up no, which kind of means yes. And again, in theory, this would sell less than the original Testarossa, if for no other reason. Ferrari even just had a smaller lineup back then, which is a factor I didn't mention before. So it's, whatever, it's maybe not as drastic of downturn as it looks. After all, there are still some massive improvements of the SF90 over the original Testarossa. The original Testarossa had a flat 12, a 4.9 liter naturally aspirated engine that made about 390 brake horsepower, and well, I'm sure if I ever got the opportunity to drive an older car, I would understand why boomers complain about new technology a lot. But a 4-liter V8 twin turbo with a 3-motor hybrid setup sounds less bad to me when you consider it makes 986 horsepower, which is a lot more horsepower. The original Testarossa did way less at 3,320 pounds, but the SF90 doesn't weigh much more, all things considered, with the hybrid setup of 3,900 pounds. Testarossa's got a 5-speed manual, with the SF90's got an 8-speed dual clutch. Testarossa does 180.2 miles per hour, where the SF90 gets up to 211. And the original Testarossa can do 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds, when the SF90 can do it in 2.3. So what was the point of that comparison? Well, now I'm going to compare the SF90 to the 849 Testarossa. Like I said, the 849 Testarossa is about $540,000 to $587,000. To the SF90 is $593,950. So, again, estimation from Motor Trend. Could be less, could be more. But if it is less, then that's pretty decent. That's one of the first bits of good news so far. Now, the SF90, I will remind you, is a 4-liter V8 twin turbo with 3-motor hybrid, and the Ferrari 849 Testarossa has the same. Now, this is not horribly unexpected. Improvements in cars these days are much more incremental, so it makes sense that they would probably just tune that current setup to try and get more horsepower out of it. That's exactly what they did. 986 to 1035. Very cool. And it did also lose 50 pounds. 3,900 pounds to 3,850 pounds. Both have the same 8-speed dual clutch automatic. And the SF90 has a top speed of 211. Ferrari 849 Testarossa's got 205. That's right, we lost 6. And 0 to 60 for the SF90 is 2.3. And the Ferrari 849 Testarossa is 2.25. Now, don't get me wrong, that better power to weight will probably be good enough to make up a rather large difference on track, which, considering that this is meant to be the sports car, not the GT, that is something well worth considering. And I'm sure this car will be faster around the Nürburgring than its predecessor. It would be kind of embarrassing if it wasn't, though. So, really, my two main points for this video is, like, does Ferrari just expect these small increments, and in the case of the top speed detriment, to be enough to sell this car better than the SF90? Probably not. I think what they're banking on selling this car is simply the use of the name Testarossa, which is one of the most highly revered and regarded names in Ferrari lore. But this has just led to upset me. And it's not even necessarily because I think this car is unworthy of the name. There are actually plenty of cars in the modern era that I think are great cars that are unjustly torn down because the manufacturer slapped an old name on it. No, see, my problem is that whenever I'm bored at work, I like looking at auctions of Testarossas. But now every time I look up Testarossa into Google, I have to look at this ugly front end. Ferrari, if you let me test drive one of these, I'll take back every negative thing I said. Also, please don't sue me.